Before we get to any of that, though, let's talk about Olympic boxing, what I've called facetiously the domestic violence event, where men climb into the ring, the boxing ring, and beat women up. There are two of them at it now. One guy from Algeria, Imane Khelif, and another one, a Taiwanese bloke called Lin Yu-ting. They're both biological. 1 year ago at the World Boxing Championships, both of them were ruled to be biologically male and therefore ineligible to compete against women, so they weren't allowed to compete. Here we are 1 year on, they are allowed to compete as women against biological females. Now, these two characters are not trans women. They're those people who were sort of born with XY chromosomes. They're male. The theory is their testes are inside them. I mean, they're unusual physical people. You know, obviously this doesn't happen. Anyway, the point is, you've seen that Algerian guy, you know, screaming, "Oh, I'm a woman." Well, you don't look like one, I've got to say that. And that poor Italian woman that you beat to death almost with two thundering punches, just two punches. She thought, "I'm going to die here." She collapsed to the canvas and just said, "This is not fair, I'm not going on." The Taiwanese guy, just the same. Guess who's defending them and saying, "Oh, they've got a right to compete"? It is a guy called Mark Adams. He's the spokesperson for the useless International Olympic Committee. He says it's quite right that every sport should decide whether or not it's going to allow trans women to compete against women. So you do it on a sport-by-sport basis. That is absurd at the Olympic Games. They should have a blanket rule. You know, no trans women compete against women. No biological males compete against women, biological females. Simple as that. Instead, you have half the sports, yes, it's allowed, half the other sports have seen the sense and it's not allowed. That is mad. Anyway, this guy defending this ludicrous system, who says, "Oh, you know, nobody should be discriminated against in the Olympic Games," where by allowing blokes to beat up women, I would suggest you're discriminating against women. But anyways, there's Mark Adams, and perhaps you won't be surprised to know he was best man at Keir Starmer's wedding. How about that? Let's talk to Director of Campaigns at Sex Matters, Fiona McAnena. Hello, Fiona.
Hi, Kevin.
Well, it's been a grotesque spectacle watching these two guys beat women up. Now, I don't want to rain down on them. They're not trans women, but, you know, the vicissitudes of nature have visited upon them an unusual physical state. They're somewhere between the two, but they are XY chromosomed biological males. And that's why a year ago at the World Boxing Championships, they were banned from competing against women. Mysteriously at the Olympic Games, they're allowed to compete, and we've seen what they're doing. I mean, that poor Italian woman, that bloke just walked in, smashed her twice in the face. She collapsed to the ground, weeping, said, "This isn't fair," and walked off. It's not fair, is it, Fiona? And Mark Adams says, this is one of the things he said. He said, yeah, well, we're all agreed, aren't we, that we don't want to go back to sex testing. Actually, Mark, if it means that I don't have to watch women getting beaten up by men, then we are not all agreed that we don't go back to sex testing. If it protects women from getting 7 bells knocked out of them by blokes, then bring on the sex testing, I say. Your thoughts?
I have to agree with you about sex testing, and actually at least 80% of women athletes competing at these games would probably agree with you too. And that's even before the boxing thing happened, because in the past, when women have been surveyed, as they were at the Atlanta Olympic Games, 82% of them wanted to keep sex testing. And why? Because they know that you don't have to be a particularly talented male to come into a women's event and, appear to shine. And that's a problem. If you're an elite woman, your talent and your skill can be overshadowed by the sheer physical advantage that male puberty gives people. So I don't know why the IOC are saying, the bad old days of sex testing. They know that that's not what women want.
Exactly. Well, let's have a look at Keir Starmer's best man, Mark Adams, defending the Olympic Games and this strange situation where biological males seem to be able to beat women up. Let's have a look at Mark.
There has a little bit, not anger, but we're a little bit passionate because, one, we want to concentrate on the sport. Everyone wants to enjoy fair sport, fair competition. I think we feel that these women have been targeted, particularly on social media. They've been subject to death threats, and it's kind of quite arbitrary. So we feel quite strongly about that. Just to remind people, this is not a transgender issue. This is absolutely not a transgender issue. These women were born as girls.
Yeah, Fiona, well, I accept that. We have to accept that. They're not transgender, but as I say, by the unusual vicissitudes of humanity, they're born as unusual specimens. They're somewhere between the two, but I'm told that the Algerian, for example, that it's likely his testes are inside him, and that may well be the case for the Taiwanese guy as well. But you know, he can scream, I'm a woman, as much as he likes. Biologically, 1 year ago, same goes for the Taiwanese, they were not women. They were ruled to be biological males. The IOC has chosen to judge them differently, but what we're seeing, as I said to you earlier, I think is a grotesque spectacle. I can't believe my eyes, can you?
Well, there are two things going on here. So the IOC are acting like this is all a complete surprise to them, and that these two women, as they call them, are somehow being put in an invidious position. But it's the IOC that's put them there, and I'll talk about that. And secondly, they shouldn't be surprised because World Athletics has been fighting with trying to keep males born with this particular disorder of sex development out of athletics since 2016, when we saw Britain's Lindsay Sharp robbed of an Olympic bronze medal because Caster Semenya, the South African, got the gold, and the other two medals were also taken by DSD athletes. So, you know, this is not a novel issue. The IOC shouldn't be surprised. World Athletics and World Aquatics have said, we're not having this anymore, we're having sex testing. And if these two boxers are being subject to abuse, that's very unfortunate, and I don't condone that in any way. But the IOC could solve that because they're running the boxing. The IOC could say, okay, no more misinformation about these two. They're women. Here's the proof. And quite honestly, they weren't there when they were born. They can't say they were born women. What a ridiculous claim. But what they could say is, we've done a sex swab. It's a very simple test. It can be processed in a day. And they could prove that they're women, but they can't do that, and we know why. I think we can guess why that is.
What a smug and self-satisfied thing for him to say, Mark Adams. Oh, I take it we're all agreed that we won't go back to the horrors of sex testing. No, Mark, we are absolutely not agreed. As I said earlier, if it means that women will be protected from being beaten up in the ring by blokes, then I'm all for sex testing, aren't you?
Yes, but you see, the real shocker here is this is the IOC's belief system at work. So other sports are being run by international federations according to different rules, and some of those are good rules, like aquatics, and some of them are bad rules. But boxing is being run by the IOC because they fell out with the IBA. And this is the IOC's framework document from 2021, where they have said there should be no presumed advantage for transgender people with transgender identities or for those with differences of sex development. And what that essentially means is we're not having sex testing. We're not interested. We only care about what you say you are.
Exactly right. And so the IOC also said about, you know, in the light of that horrible 46 seconds where that poor Italian woman was just beaten up with two mighty blows, that looked very much like a man punching a woman to me. They said, oh, well, you see, the thing is, no one should be discriminated against in the Olympic Games. They should all be allowed to compete. Well, by allowing blokes to compete against women, I say the IOC is discriminating against women.
Yes, and no one has a right to be in the Olympics. I fully agree with you. We need a female category with no male advantage in it, or else we're discriminating against women. And, you know, today there's been an IBA media conference, which was a bit shambolic, and people are focusing on, you know, this row between the IBA and the IOC, but neither of them has covered themselves in glory today, but at least the IBA have come out and revealed what information they could. The IOC have chosen not to share any information. And what's more, we know that the National Olympic Committees of Algeria, where Khelif comes from, and Chinese Taipei, where Lin comes from, told the IBA this morning they must not disclose the results of those sex tests.
It's just ridiculous, isn't it? And what I say, Fiona, tell me what you think. Last question, really. I mean, it's the madness of these unfair Olympic Games is because the IOC will not instigate the common sense thing that they should do, which is a complete blanket rule. All events, women, trans women or biological males cannot compete against biological females, be it for reasons of trans or for reasons of biology that we've been talking about. If they just put that rule in, all events, then we wouldn't have a problem here. But bizarrely, they seem to think they want to continue with this system where some events will allow trans women to compete against women, others won't. They say it's quite right we do it sport by sport, something that Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, has fallen in with, I think, very mistakenly. Yes, it's quite right, it should be sport by sport. It isn't quite right that it should be sport by sport. It should be a blanket rule, end of, shouldn't it?
Well, I think this is going to be a wake-up call for a lot of people, because it's very simple. If your sport has to be separated by sex, as most sports do, with a tiny number of exceptions, then that means that no one with the advantages of male puberty should be in the women's category. And it doesn't matter how they identify. But, you know, some Olympic sports have already imposed those rules on their own initiative. And it's the IOC that has really embraced this idea of gender identity. If it were left to the IOC, it would all be like this.
Exactly right. As you say, that's the essence of the problem. Some sports have been allowed to come up with sensible rules. How about this? Women compete against women and men compete against men and nothing else. Seems to me quite sensible. Other sports, no. They can do what they like. They can still have trans women competing against women. That is a crazy system and it will only lead to more and more problems. But Fiona, very good to talk to you. As always, we're on the same page. Thank you very much for your time.